morning, everybody. Welcome to the Judicial Institute at Pace Law School. We are thrilled to be back at the Judicial Institute for the Housing Summit. And this is our 6th annual Housing Summit. And we are grateful to see so many faces, familiar faces in attendance today. And I just want to welcome my sidekick here today, partner, collaborator in the Housing Summit, and training programs and other educational events that we've done. Jason Labate, a partner at Goldstein Hall, and Goldstein Hall has done tremendous support of all of our initiatives, and so we're thrilled to be partnering with them once again. And we have Rose Noonan here, the Executive Director of the Housing Action Council. Rose always deserves a round of applause. The Housing Action Council is also our other partner in putting on the Housing Summit. Before I turn it to Jason, I just want to give you a sneak peek of where we're heading today, and I'll turn it to Jason to tell you a little bit more.
Great. The other thing I want to do before I tell you a little bit more is to, I guess, do our quick thanks. So thank you for being here. The single overriding communication objective, the SACO that I wanted for this is everyone should be a recruiter in this room. So there are many familiar faces, there are many new faces, so thank you. But the only way that this is going to work is if we broaden the tent and convince others, right? We're not just preaching to the choir, that we bring others in to understand sort of the need and the benefit of affordable housing and make it a little bit less scary. And one of the ways to do it is to have this summit. So I want to thank again our partners, Housing Action Council and PACE. I want to thank our sponsors because without the dollars that make this work and give us coffee and breakfast, it's just not going to happen. So I want to thank All New York Title. I want to thank Federated National Land. They are two of the best when it comes to title and particularly affordable. And we thank them for their partnership. Lasberg Construction Associates, and AKRF. So if you would continue to support them so that they can support us and this effort, please do. So the organizing principle for this, if you guys have been following the news, was this very bold proclamation by the governor, which was the Housing Compact, which offered both carrots and sticks to say, or I guess made the inarguably bold, or arguably bold, I think it's apparent, statement that there is a housing shortage, and it is at crisis levels, and it results in inaffordability. It results in below standards of living, overcrowding, unreasonable commute times. I mean, you name it, and it's ultimately going to have collateral effects in our economy, and it already has, and on arguably human rights. And so notwithstanding what the state of play is of that compact now, we wanted to use that as an organizing principle to say, okay, well, let's talk about the compact, let's talk about the crisis, and let's talk about the compact and the proposals or the ideas it put forward, and let's unpack them a little bit and make them turn them into reality, and what are the real world implications, challenges, applications of that. And so we have 3 panels that are going to unpack that for you. Is there more that's on me,
No.
Tiffany?
No, this is our little
Right.
Jason, now Tiffany. All right. So just as Jason said, we're going to be referencing some of the, quote, preferred actions that came out of the compact to address, again, our housing crisis. We'll be talking today about site identification in this first panel and adaptive reuse. We're going to be talking about the variety of zoning solutions that municipalities can consider to create housing, including, again, some of the actions the governor talked about, the rezoning of commercial areas to allow for residential, strategies, again, for adaptive reuse, the removal of exclusionary zoning measures, the TOD proposals, and, of course, accessory dwelling units. And we'll also be highlighting some of the financing and funding around those strategies. We're going to stay practical today. We're going to be talking about resources, so get your pens out. And we're going to be talking about things that have been implemented. We have a host of different municipalities here participating, And again, I think as Jason said, what we do here at the summit is try to just be proactive in this and not reactive to what's coming before us, but how do we as municipalities, as leaders in the region, again, look to the ways that we can plan accordingly for our communities and for the need of housing. For those of you who are on planning, a little housekeeping things now, who are on planning and zoning boards or legislative boards and are looking for training credits, please make sure you talk to Anne Marie McCoy and that she has your information. There are AIA credits for architects today. And then attorneys, if you did not sign in or sign out, you know that Anne Marie will come hunt you down. So please make sure you do that and fill out the evaluation form. The PowerPoints will be available after the close of today's program and posted up online, so no worries about that. And again, as Jason said, we couldn't do this without the support of our sponsors. So I think we have, again, a full packed agenda. I'm going to turn it immediately back to Jason and start our first panel with our fellow panelists. So, Mayor and Jason.
Great, thank you, Tiffany. So as we typically do, have a packed agenda, and so we are gonna sort of hope to minimize formalities and get right to it. And this panel is particularly dense, and which means I'll talk faster than usual, which is pretty fast. So I will quickly introduce the panel, starting from my right, your left, on down, and then we will just get into it. From the Division of Homes, Community, and Renewal, we have with us Patrick Love, who is the Vice President and Chief of Staff of Multifamily Finance and Development. Next, we have Jacqueline Tyler, who is from Nexus Creative Design. To her right, your left, is John Fry, who is also a principal at Nexus Creative and Design. And all the way to your left, my right, is Mayor Brian Pugh, who is the mayor of Croton-on-Hudson. And so as the agenda states, in the very brief amount of time that we have, we're going to talk about site identification and adaptive reuse, because frequently, this is the whole game, right? I guess financing is a large portion of it. But it's probably second only to site identification, and community involvement in all the places outside of New York City are really one of the drivers of whether and how there can be affordable housing. Before we dive into the panel discussion, I would be remiss if I did not give Patrick the opportunity and or the unfair question/pressure to give him to ask him to give us whatever sort of unclassified, maybe quasi-classified update on the housing compact that you can give, and sort of briefly where we go, or where the HCR is thinking we go from here, and if there's lessons learned and next steps.
Sure. Thanks, Jason. Morning. And blanket thank you to everyone involved in today's conference and today's panel as well. So before I get specifically into the housing compact and where we're at, where we're going, I want to set the stage a little bit, kind of building on what you were touching on before, related to the affordable housing crisis and what we're up against. And I want to make this front and center, very clear, kind of top of mind for folks as we discuss this panel and today's panels as well throughout this morning and early afternoon. So to be blunt, to put this front and center, New York State has an affordable housing shortage. It's at crisis levels. It's in the city, it's outside of the state, it's in the Hudson Valley. And so what's largely driving this is in the decade preceding the pandemic, we only added 400,000 units of housing around the state while adding 1.2 million jobs. So there's this divergence between new housing creation and then job development within New York State. And so without new housing, rents have risen dramatically, home prices have risen dramatically, and that means that across the board, looking at all of the different regions around the state, 40 to 60%, particularly within the Hudson Valley region, 54%, in the capital region, 52%, of all rental households are rent burdened. So that means that they're paying more than 30% of their income on rent. So as Jason was talking about before, this absolutely threatens, and we're already seeing the effects of this threatening New York's, economy and viability for people living here and working within New York State. So this is why the governor has come out and said that we need 800,000 new units of housing across the state over the course of the next decade. And there's kind of two elements to this. One element of it, which is kind of an interesting component, which we'll talk a little bit more about later in this panel, is that New York State is already really a leader in affordable housing. We, compared to other states around the country, finance the most affordable housing per capita. Already 44% of our rental stock is rent regulated or public housing. And I'll talk about this a bit more later, but the governor has a $25 billion plan over the course of the next 5 years to subsidize the construction of affordable housing. But we're also a leader at the same time, a leader in restricting housing. So new building permits per capita in New York State, in our city and the surrounding suburbs and exurbs, are dramatically lower when you look at comparable cities like DC, Boston, San Francisco. And that's what that latter half is what the Housing Compact is trying to address. It's trying to motivate the market to produce additional units across the state. And so in January, the governor came out with the Housing Compact, and there's a couple of key elements here. One was on statewide housing targets. So downstate, a 3% increase in housing per locality on a 3-year cycle. Upstate, 1% increase. In that formula, rent-restricted units count double. Also, in that same kind of calculation, the 3% downstate, 1% upstate on that three-year cycle. If a locality does not meet that target, then there is a possibility for fast-tracked approval for new construction, affordable housing development. The other element of it is requiring cities, localities that have an MTA stop in them, within half mile of that MTA stop, rezoning to accommodate additional housing. And it's a tiered approach, so closer to the city, it's denser near that half mile. Farther outside in the transit shed, it's a little bit less dense. There are also some other elements of the Housing Compact, which I won't necessarily get into here because we're limited on time, regarding zoning for office conversions, legalizing basement apartments in New York City, increasing the amount of lead abatement that happens around the state, increased tenant protection funding. But as folks likely saw for this year's budget cycle, the Housing Compact was unfortunately not included. And so in terms of next steps, I'll echo what the governor has said. We're going to go back on this. This is just the beginning of the journey, and we're going to work on this until we solve it. She cited Wayne Gretzky saying, you missed the 100% of the shots that you don't take, and I really need to credit the governor here in having a full-throated policy to really attack this, right? It wasn't a Band-Aid solution. It was something that was really intended to solve the issue at hand here. And, we're trying. We're definitely not done. We're definitely encouraged by the speaker, Carl Hastie, saying that this was an education period for the legislature. And if we look at other states that have implemented similar policies like California, Massachusetts, Connecticut, it has taken a bit of time, and this is definitely a start of the conversation for us. So, we're regrouping, and we'll go back for next year's budget cycle. This is an issue that's certainly not going away, and an issue that we certainly need solutions for. So, cautiously optimistic as we move ahead, and then I'll talk a little bit more about the governor's affordable housing, subsidized housing plan a little bit later in this panel, which I'm very optimistic about. So I'll stop there and hand it back to you, Jason.
Yeah, thank you, Patrick. So I'm heartened to hear that this will not go silently into that good night, because it's good that the governor is going to continue to push this, and I think that it's incumbent upon all of us to help push this. We need to push it all at all levels. And if there are ideas that need to be added or changed or amended, then I think there needs to be a big discussion. But certainly this is a problem or a need or a right, an economic reality that we all need to address, because it's not going to go away. Okay, so moving to the specifics of this panel, as I had sort of alluded to, a large part of the game, or at least where it needs to start, if you want to call it that, is site identification. And that's what this panel is so carefully curated to address in 30 minutes that we have. Answer all of the questions that could possibly be brought up in 30 minutes. What we frequently find, if you're in this space, you probably frequently find, there is this tension that exists when affordable housing is brought up in the Hudson Valley, in most cases, which is the community is generally against affordable housing to say our schools are already overcrowded, demonstrably usually untrue, and that they're only getting more crowded, usually demonstrably untrue, that there's no place to put it, and we don't want those people, whoever those people are, frequently their parents, grandparents, neighbors, etc. In the same breath, they'll say, and what's going on with that building over there? That's just sat idle for 2 decades. When are we going to put a brewery in it? We really need a brewery. I like breweries as much as the next person, probably more than the next person. We probably don't need more. And so this panel, I really want to attack that tension. We're going to walk through first. Mayor Pugh is going to talk about his specific example. John and Jacqueline are going to talk about sort of lessons that they've learned and compass points, John, that they've taken away from their experiences on how this might be solved and how to approach it. And then ultimately back to Patrick to say, okay, great, you've got a site. You still need to fund it. And what sort of resources does the HCR have to deploy it? And I will say at the outset that HCR is not going to solve all of our problems, but they are a big, important player. So we need to continue to push Patrick and his team as much as we possibly can for every dollar in support that we can get, but we also need to resort to self-help as well. So with that, Mayor Pugh, would you please share with us your experience and, dare I say, successes on site identification regarding affordable housing?
All right, great. Title card. All right. So thank you again. It's great to see so many of you, especially the Croton residents who are here with us today. I'd like to briefly acknowledge my planning board member, Jeff Haynes, who's in the audience. And then, of course, we also have our village attorney, Linda Whitehead, who's with us, and AKRF, which has been a partner with us on much of this journey. So going back to your point with regards to the discourse of, where you're going to put it. The village has, some of these similar challenges as many communities. I don't think that the village is typical. I don't think that any village is typical of a suburban community, but I would like to say that we're not atypical, right? And so we have those challenges. About only 3% of this is from our comprehensive plan. It's more or less accurate. The figures have changed probably slightly since this was last updated, but about 3% of the village is available as vacant land for development, and as indicated in the Housing Monitor's 2013 report card, and this figure is basically still correct, 0% of that is zoned for as-of-right development. Despite that, there is definitely room to grow. So this is also to put the village, again, in kind of in context in Westchester County. On the right, you can see that Briarcliff Manor, this is just comparisons to villages only. Towns are not included in this. Not all the villages are here, but for context, Briarcliff Manor is probably the most thinly settled of the villages. As you can see right on the right table, residents per square mile. The village has a little over 4 square miles of land. And then you see Buchanan, then Croton on Hudson. So we're the third most least dense village in the county. And then the next one in line, the next community that's more dense than us is Irvington. And then much further down is our friend Dobbs Ferry. The point there being is that, Irvington, I think by any reasonable standard, people would consider it to have very much a small town, small village character. But you can have growth, and I think Dobbs Ferry too would maintain that kind of small town, small village character. But to even achieve the level of density that you see in Irvington, the village would need almost 3,000 more residents, which is not in the cards in the near term. So there is absolutely room for growth. And similarly, there are the public resources to support it. Again, this is not necessarily true of all communities, but it's true of ours, and it's probably true of others. And we go to our next. My apologies if this is a little hard to read, but as you can see, this is public school enrollment. As you can see, we peaked in 2009, the year my sister graduated, and we're about 9% of that. We're about 9% below the peak. There are other communities that are at or close to their peak right now, but there are other communities that have seen decreases of enrollment that are even greater. And it's reasonable to expect that trend is going to continue, as you can see from the Westchester County births over the last decade or so. For a variety of complex demographic reasons we won't get into, birth rates are on the decline, which means that it's not reasonable, I think, to expect a dramatic change in the trajectory of school enrollment. All right, now to go more concretely, and the point of this panel, right, is site identification. And at least in my limited experience, may not be true of all places, but I think that a key factor is actually identifying public parcels. This is no slight against our friends in the private sector, but when the government is motivated, the public sector can move quickly to redevelop land. And so this is a picture of the area that was rezoned in the village over a process beginning really in 2019 and ending in 2020, just before the pandemic struck, where we rezoned a number of sections of the village along North Riverside, parallel to Route 9. And at the heart of that was the so-called Katz property that the village had acquired about a decade previously as the settlement from a lawsuit with the then owner of the property, in which was more or less a vacant lot. It had once, many, many years ago, been a brickyard and had since become overgrown, a popular site for local teenagers to congregate for all the activities that teenagers like to engage in when their parents aren't present, and also coyotes and other wild animals. And as you can see, this is right out of our comp plan. This is right out of our comp plan update that we did as part of this rezoning process. The last item is leverage the Katz property to create a small park and improve the gateway to the village. And there will be a public space accessible on the corner for folks. But we saw this as the keystone in the North Star for this redevelopment. And this is a more granular view of the Katz property specifically and the concept that is being pursued there now. As you can see, there is the corner, the kind of public space that's going to be landscaped, manicured, and accessible to the wider community. As you can see, the Katz property is across the street from a major shopping center, which I'll get to in a second, a automobile retailer, and then behind it is a cul-de-sac community. Well, more or less, it's not fully isolated, but a subdivision, let's put it that way. And so the approved plan and what is currently being built is for 33 units of affordable housing spread between 2 buildings. It's going to accommodate a variety of family sizes and income levels. Approximately, or not approximately, 11 units will be 1 bedroom, 11 will be 2 bedroom, and 11 will be 3. And they will be available at the 30%, 60%, and 80% area median income levels in the same proportion. And going back to the site selection, part of what, aside from this being a public property that is available for redevelopment, I think there's some compelling factors for this particular parcel. And again, it's its proximity to the upper village, which is not pictured, but it's functionally our village's downtown, and then the shopping center across the street is also home to a supermarket, Apple Farms. Not a plug for them, but I am mentioning it, and I think there's one in White Plains. And the objective here is to facilitate a low-impact, walkable lifestyle that's less car-centric and can accommodate households of different economic backgrounds, some of which might not have ready access to an automobile. And so this is also on a Beeline bus route. And again, it is possible to live. It will be possible to live here without a car. Again, some people are going to choose to have cars, and we've accommodated that as well. We have ample parking on site, but it will also not be a food desert, and it will not be a transit desert. So we're looking forward to this being a place of real opportunity for families at all different stages of life, whether they're retired, whether they're young workers or whether they're just starting out and having children. Okay, and here is a frontal view of the parcel, or in the concept.
Very nice.
Yep. And also, as part of that rezoning, now we go to our private sector friends. We have a site technically 25 South Riverside, and this is currently a privately owned parcel. This was the building here pictured no longer exists. This was a hardware store that went out of business some years ago. It has since been demolished, but it has been approved for new housing. This is a schematic from their application. That would be for 39 units, 4 of them affordable. Again, this is a private development. We have, as many communities in Westchester have done, adopted the county's model ordinance requiring a 10% set aside. So this building will have 10% affordable units. And then here it is in profile. Again, just emphasizing the potential for growth. These are relatively low, both these buildings, both the Katz building and the Riverside building will be compared by the standards of our village, perhaps not, but by the standards of other communities, I think fair to say, low rise, 3-story, 35 feet maximum. And as you can see, it has minimal impact on the view shed of the neighbors located up the hill. And then also we are moving forward on 1380 Albany Post Road. This is 29 units. This permit has also been approved. This was actually done separately as part of a separate rezoning from the ones that facilitated Katz for whatever reason. This was probably the zoning amendment that has been the subject of, let's put it this way, the subject of the least amount of public controversy in recent village history. And again, it's 29 units, 4 of them affordable, located on the very north end of the village. And in aggregate, with what's been approved, Katz is under construction already, and then the other 2 have been approved. We're on the way to approximately 101 units of housing, 41 of those being affordable of the 101. And speaking of the governor's housing compact, one element is the growth targets. And so the village has a little less than 3,000 housing units. So doing some very simple math, what's already been approved would put us above that. And if you were to apply the growth target formulas in the governor's original proposal, it's even greater because the affordable housing units are counted for double. But the point here again is that it is possible to grow your community intelligently with modest impact on the neighbors and inconsistent with the resources. And going back to the larger question of site identification, I would say, again, it's the public parcels. That's a major factor in moving ahead. The public parcel, I'll note again, is the one that's furthest along in all of this. And trying to avoid the creation of food and transit deserts, also a critical goal. And just a reflection on the process is, in the rezoning to prepare the way for the 33-unit affordable development, that probably got us the most public controversy. I think the more abstract something is, the more concern there is. And the more concrete there is, the less concern there is. 100%. There were definitely opponents at the end. There's still people who were opposed, but we went from having a meeting room that was full of concerned residents to a handful of folks that came out at the end. And I think that's because when they saw what was actually going to be built, 2 buildings rather, in the case of Katz, only 2 stories tall, no more than 35 feet, and providing homes for families in need. Most people in the village came around to that concept, and I hope that we can do that in other communities in Westchester.
I'm sure you spared us a lot of the gory details, and you don't look worse for wear. So thank you for sharing those successes, Mayor. I'm sure other municipalities and private developers will have many questions for you. I'm going to hand it over to John and Jacqueline, who can talk about their experiences working with municipalities and developers and others, and sort of what lessons they've learned and keys they have to success, or not, in identifying sites and moving affordable projects forward.
Thanks, Jason. There are phrases embedded in our presentation. Some of them are not architecture or planning phrases. One of them is leadership fortitude. And that's a nod to the mayor who's sitting on my right and his team. The cocktail of site identification and assessment parameters is really multifaceted. It's beyond land use metrics. It's beyond financing. It includes leadership. And I understand that none of that's profound here in this room, likely, as is the range of affordable housing examples that we have in the Hudson Valley and in Westchester in particular. It spans all typologies, from single family to adaptive reuse and higher densities in between, including mixed use. And we actually have a fairly long, we're in our third decade, really, of modern affordable housing pursuit. We'll talk about a few examples, lessons learned over time. Obviously, we're still learning lessons. As Jason alluded to, much of site identification begins in varied conversations within communities. Sometimes they begin with what's going on with that property. And what are the opportunities in ghost, latent, or challenged properties? And challenged properties really speak to grounded notions of extreme topography or challenges for traffic access. But in this current age of proactive initiatives, identifying sites that can lend to affordable housing shortages, we understand it's a wide bandwidth from post-industrial age adaptive reuse initiatives to an evolving faith-based institution evolution. And we'll share some examples of that also, and the driving forces. And obviously, we all want to get to a happy place, right? We want to address community needs. We want to reinforce built environment fabric, our community fabrics, in a positive way. And so today's entire program, really, beyond this initial panel, is all about that. I wanted to share, in terms of site assessment, some interesting dynamics have unfolded over the past few years, much of them rooted here at Pace Land Use Law Center and the initiatives that are evolving out of programs here that are really began as academic training exercises evolving into real world experiences. So I'm sharing this notion or this project in Rotterdam, New York, that began as an academic exercise. Really, I see Peter Cook here from New York State Council of Churches. It was a partnership with Pace Land Use Law Center regarding the program was called Who's My Neighbor? And it focused on assisting and training faith-based institutions in this broader notion of what's next, how do you complete your mission, how do you realize your mission, in particular affordable housing contributions. And so there was a case study group in Rotterdam, New York, 2 forward-thinking congregations, one trending upward, one trending downward. You know the storylines all too well. And so they were in the unique position of having 2 sites. And so the initial study was, okay, let's identify which site best fits your faith-based mission and which one best fits your desire to continue a mission on another site. And part of today's dialogue regards all of the influencers for site identification and site assessment, and they kind of go hand in hand. And in this instance, it was really a community's comprehensive plan. And fortunately, that Rotterdam, prior to this, had implemented a fairly forward-thinking, robust, comprehensive plan that in the end clearly identified which site would best host the faith-based mission and which site would host the next chapter. And it is the Trinity Reformed site, which was in a unique overlay district that accommodated a higher density. It accommodated parking nuances and synergy, and that's an element that we'll hopefully have time to touch on later. But here's a real-world example of forward-thinking, proactive trajectories towards developing affordable housing. Speaking to the third decade of understanding and learning lessons, really repeating some of the dynamics that are 30 years old, here are two what I would call early. I'm not suggesting they're the earliest projects in Westchester. The Fireman's Cooperative Project in Dobbs Ferry, Cross Street condominiums in Yonkers. Many of you are probably familiar with the initiatives that supported the development of both of these projects. They were quasi, I would say, proactive efforts. They were very early on in terms of understanding site assessment initiatives, financing. Both of them met with the same type of headwinds that we experience today. So 30 years later, we're still in that same boat. But I think some of the lessons learned here were healing in missing pieces of community fabric, that affordable housing can contribute in a positive way of healing in community fabric. I suspected, particularly in the Cross Street condominium scenario, if you visit there, many of you may have, you would not know that that was an affordable housing-centric project. I think if we applied the science of the long-term impact of that project, I suspect it would suggest it supported stabilizing a neighborhood and lending to the wealth-building component that affordable housing has the opportunity to do. I also suspect many lessons are emerging, and I can't speak to those, about how transitional ownership, what are the real world factors as projects begin to mature. As I mentioned, many influencers in site identification and assessment. The example we shared in Rotterdam was really driven by comprehensive plan, and
It's got the 5-minute warning.
so
Yeah, we're running up against our time frame. I think I can take moderator privilege and eke out another 3 minutes before Tiffany tackles.
I just got
I'm
the, I
passing
got
it
the
along.
wink from Tiffany.
Yeah, and I want to make sure that Patrick has an opportunity because everybody wants to know about.
Yep. I'll run through these quickly. So in the site selection analysis, there's the basics, right? And we have these up here. Figuring out your site dimensions, vegetation constraints, analyzing all of that information and selecting a site. What I would say is we participated in a program recently where the community had done that, right? We had 4 different communities. They all came to the program seeking specific desires for sites that they had identified. What I would say is they all then had 2 of the same challenges: financing and zoning.
Yep.
So that is what we see classically across the board. Rarely are we presented with a project and a site that does not require some type of variance in order to get the financial side to work, to make the project work. So although all of these things that we have up on the screen are important factors, and they are important factors for you to be looking at when you're looking through your community, you also have to think about how your site and potentially surrounding sites might be able to work together. The fact that we took all of the sites initially, and I'll just flip through the 4 that we looked at recently, they all had similar desires. They wanted supportive housing, they wanted specific buildings and specific types of housing designated somewhere, for instance, for firefighters, police, or community service individuals. And what we found was that then played into what your AMI was. So how do you balance out market housing for those individuals who are leaving the community because they can't find affordable housing, even though they don't qualify for affordable housing, right? That's the other challenge here.
Subsidized projects, yeah.
So how do we go about that? Is there opportunity for, in this community, we were looking at one site and there was another vacant site nearby. So is there an opportunity to work and partner with other people in the community to figure out how to make a successful project? Because quite often, even though this site might work for the purposes of the physical aspects of the site, or, it's a great spot to not turn into a brewery, does that site allow us, zoning-wise, to do what we need to do? So the other big aspect to this, and I'm going to pass it on to Patrick, is that we need to make sure that the zoning, and whether it's an overlay district, et cetera, are being incorporated right from the beginning. Because we can identify these sites, but then we need to work as municipalities to go and look and see what it is that we can do in order to make these sites buildable sites, because so often they're not. Over to you.
Amazing. Thank you. So building directly off of that, I think HCR should very much be seen as a partner in really any project that's being considered. So if you're a developer, property owner, property manager, architect, mayor, elected official, government official, we'll even talk to the lawyers.
Begrudgingly.
We want to talk to you, right? And it's an early and often scheme too, right?
Yes.
We don't necessarily identify sites as an agency, but as those sites do come our way, we definitely want to be partners in figuring out the financing and developing the program behind it. So I touched on this a bit before, but I think the main scheme that we're operating under is this governor's plan, Housing Plan 2. For $25 billion over the course of 5 years. We're in year 2 of that program, and I'll kind of touch on some of a few elements that I think are important, and some of the few kind of new programs that we have as well. The goals behind that plan are 100,000 units over the course of 5 years. Of that 100,000, 10,000 of them are going to be supportive housing, and then in addition to that 100,000, we're going to target 50,000 buildings, 50,000 units around the state to be electrified. So converting from fossil fuel-based heating systems to electrified heating systems. And I'll touch on kind of what we're doing in that arena in a second. So the best way to kind of think about our programs is, based on unit size. So we do everything from single family. You'll hear more later today about an ADU program that we're setting up, which is very exciting. We do home ownership programs as well by offering down payment assistance to low-income folks. But for the most part, we finance buildings that are around greater than 30 units or so. Finance the new construction and rehabilitation of buildings that are greater than 30 units. We do have some programs that offer assistance for acquisition, rehabilitation of smaller buildings as well. But if it's smaller than 30 units, we look to our localities, counties, to kind of take the lead for those types of projects. Before I touch kind of on our broader pipeline, let me just touch briefly on this new program that we're setting up called the Climate Friendly Homes Fund. And so this is the 50,000 unit target to convert 50,000 units from fossil fuel-based heating systems to electrification. And it's super interesting program, statewide, kind of geographically agnostic. And we want to see these buildings kind of convert from oil burning furnaces, natural gas burning furnaces to heat pump technology usually. There are no affordability restrictions on that program, which is very interesting. There's a restrictive declaration that will ultimately be put in place for the financing that's there. So the owner of that building can't just rip out the system after putting it into place. But there are no affordability restrictions, and we're starting to see some pretty major uptake in that program, which is interesting. And then for the kind of standard pipeline that we have, it's primarily financed through the Low-Income Housing Tax Credit Program. And so the smaller buildings, around 30 to 90 units or so, are financed through our 9% LIHTC program. And then the larger buildings are financed through our 4% LIHTC program. Those programs again, kind of early and often as you're thinking about programming for what those sites look like. We very much want to have those conversations with you. In my experience with HCR, it's very much some developers, some owners only really like a few touch points. They submit our applications, we have the technical assistance session, and then they kind of come back to us and ask where they sit in the pipeline. It does not need to be like that. It can very much be an open door and an open conversation around kind of developing that program and then slotting you into the pipeline, be it on the kind of 4% side of things or in the 9% side of things. And then of those buildings, I think, again, geographically agnostic, but we do focus on certain populations. So we have a senior housing program, supportive, public housing, Mitchell Llamas, mixed income. We kind of want to touch rent-restricted housing across the board. Because adaptive reuse is in the title of this panel, I thought I would touch on it super quickly. We do adaptive reuse projects all around the state. We love them. New York State has very beautiful buildings where we can couple it with federal and state historic tax credits, all the better. We have a few projects kind of in the larger cities, Rochester, Buffalo, Albany, et cetera. And then the last program that I'll mention, which I think is top of mind for a lot of people, especially as we're kind of cresting out of the end of the pandemic, is a program that we have to convert hotels and office buildings around the state. This program has the name of Honda, Housing Our Neighbors with Dignity Act. Very odd the state legislature decided to name this program after a Japanese car company, but that's besides
Reliable.
Besides reliable, sure. Besides the point, we have announced recently a project in South Jamaica where we're converting a hotel to supportive housing. We're super, super excited about that. We have a few other projects in our pipeline. But as you know, mayors and other folks start to think about the future of their downtown areas, there will be conversions of office buildings, there will be conversions of hotels, and we definitely want to be part of those conversations to ideally make them rent-restricted housing. So I'll stop there, but I think we have this challenge before us, and we need to work together to address it. The governor and the state has commended a lot of resources towards it, and I hope some productive conversations come out of these morning's discussion. So thank you.
Thank you, Patrick. Round of applause for our panelists. Unfortunately, we don't have time for questions in the round, but please attack them. We can take one question? All right, Tiffany's giving it. All right, no pressure. Any thoughts, comments, questions before we usher everyone off? While we're saying that, while everyone might be thinking about it, very quickly, I want to make a plug. If you don't know about Lula, then you should ask Tiffany and find out about Lula. I was joking before, but it's not really a joke. I think it should be mandatory for every local official about site identification and figuring out how to make that work and make it more productive, which is exactly what John and Jacqueline were referencing. And I'll echo what Patrick said, right? You heard it, he said it, we're all witnesses. Open door, early and often, right? It's not gonna work without site identification and not gonna work without financing. HCR is not gonna be the financing for everything, but it's gonna be the financing for a lot. You better know early on whether they are, and if they are, how they are, and when they are. Any questions?
Just a statement. I just want to say my name is Angela Davis Farish. I run the Housing Authority for the beautiful city of New Rochelle. And please extend to the governor my thanks on funding the ERAP program so I can keep my public housing residents in place.
Love it, absolutely.
Yeah, this was a huge win because municipal housing authorities were sort of sidelined on ERAP because they have other subsidies, but they absolutely need the money as much, if not more, than others. And so a huge step for the governor and the legislature to put that in the budget. There was one question in the back, gentleman, all the way, and then that'll be it.
I'm the town supervisor in a very small 7,500 person rural community. We had a perfect site that was working with adaptive reuse. Eventually, the developer had to walk away because of the cost of the infrastructure. I think that's a key element for the smaller rural communities is where we don't have community water, community sewer, is having the ability to work with somebody to solve the infrastructure problems of water and septic and things sort of bringing that to the discussion table as well as, obviously it all reverts back to financing, but the developing of infrastructure to make these sites available is a big thing.
That's a great point. I'll start and then I'll kick it over to others. I know in Westchester County, right, the county has two big buckets of funding or programs that support affordable. One is the new homes acquisition financing, and the other one is for infrastructure, and I forget what the acronym is for that. I'm assuming that you're not in Westchester, but this is an excellent point of exactly the items that should be, or issues that should be brought up in a venue like this, so that we can work with other counties and figure out whether there are opportunities to create funds like that, and if not, have other resources, because you're right, it is a real issue and an impediment to doing something that otherwise the community may support. Any other thoughts or comments on that?
Just one notion. You'll see a term on the screen now that you won't find in the dictionary called proformability. We made that term up in the office because we started to learn the dynamics, the infrastructure challenges, the funding profiles, obviously the leadership dynamics, how all of that test fits a project and a site, a potential site's ability to support affordable housing. And I think all of this kind of is a broader notion of that.
Okay, one more round of applause for our panelists. Thank you.
Thank you.
Over to you, Tiff.
Thank you to this panel, and I'm trying to keep us on track. My other panelists for the next session, if you could start heading up and taking a seat up here. I just want to mention one of the communities I was recently working with, talking about site identification, actually led a public engagement effort. I hope they don't mind me picking on them right now. I'm staring at you in the row. But they led a public engagement session. Their Affordable Housing Committee did this. It was online, and the community came out to listen to both the local housing issues that they had, but most importantly, at the end of the session, they had the public talk about the variety of sites that they could be open to for housing. And it was so interesting when the public got involved with this, where they began to brainstorm very creatively, right? The underutilized sites, they took zoning away. We told everyone to ignore zoning, ignore everything. Where are the sites and communities that are ready to be adaptively reused? What's vacant? What could be scaled up? And they have a list now. The Affordable Housing Committee has a list of sites that the public sort of gave them in terms of, these are potential places. So I want to applaud. They're also going to come up later, the village of Dobbs Ferry, for doing that. It was a great effort. Yep, look, they're doing a little, yep. And